I moved into a dirt-cheap apartment with one rule: no noise after midnight. I thought it was a joke, until 12:01, when something knocked from inside my bedroom wall. I knocked back. And whatever lives in the walls whispered my name. Now it follows me wherever I go. Even tonight. Even as you're hearing this. Listen, do you hear it knocking too? When I moved into the apartment, I told myself the same lie every broke person tells when they sign a suspiciously cheap lease: it's probably fine. The building was old, so old the paint flaked like dead skin and the hallways smelled of rust and boiled potatoes. But I had just lost my job, and the thought of paying almost nothing for a place with its own bedroom felt like winning a grotesque lottery. The landlord was the first red flag. A thin man with eyes too wide and too bright, the kind of brightness that doesn't come from joy but from someone who sleeps lightly, ready to run. His handshake lingered for a heartbeat too long, as if memorizing the feel of my wrist. He gave me a tour of the apartment with rehearsed enthusiasm, avoiding looking at the walls for more than a second at a time. Then he showed me the contract. Everything seemed normal until the final clause, typed, not printed, in a slightly different font: no noise after midnight. This includes music, conversation, movement, or attempts to communicate. I laughed when I read it. He didn't. It's an old building, he said quietly. Sound carries. And people get disturbed. I should have asked more questions. But the rent was unbelievably low, and desperation makes you skip red flags the size of blood-soaked bedsheets. I moved in that afternoon. I spent the rest of the day unpacking the essentials: clothes, a mattress, a lamp that flickered even when unplugged. The bedroom was small, with a single window facing the alley and walls thick enough to muffle the city but thin enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. By the time I finished, it was close to midnight. I remembered the contract, rolled my eyes, and sat on the mattress in silence. 11:58. 11:59. Then midnight. The apartment exhaled, like the building itself was settling into a new position. Pipes groaned. The floorboards creaked. It felt normal enough that I relaxed, telling myself I'd sleep early and maybe wake up with a fraction of optimism. Then, at 12:01, something knocked on my bedroom wall. Not on the door. On the wall directly beside me, 3 slow, deliberate taps. The kind someone makes when they expect you to answer. I sat frozen. My first thought was that it was a neighbor. But the wall wasn't shared, behind it was the hallway. I pressed my ear against it. Silence. I whispered, "Hello?" Immediately, something scraped on the other side, like a fingernail drawing a line across the plaster. The temperature dropped so fast I felt my breath fog. I backed away from the wall, climbed into my blankets, and convinced myself it had to be the building settling. Old pipes. Rats. Anything else. But just as I was drifting into a shallow, uneasy sleep. 3 knocks again. This time closer, as if they were coming from inside the wall itself. I wanted to scream, but the contract's warning echoed in my mind: no noise after midnight. And I had the dreadful sense that whatever was knocking expected silence too. Minutes crawled by. When I finally gathered the nerve, I lifted my hand and tapped the wall once, just to prove to myself I wasn't scared. A whisper, not a voice, not quite, pressed through the plaster and into my ear: "You shouldn't have answered." My blood froze. I didn't sleep. I sat curled on the mattress until the first light of dawn finally seeped into the room. And when the sun touched the wall, the whisper stopped, but a new noise replaced it. A soft, rhythmic scratching. Coming from inside the wall. Moving. Searching. As if something was trying to find a way out. And somehow, I knew it wouldn't stay inside. Forever. I spent the entire next day pretending nothing had happened. People do that when they're afraid. They build little routines out of ordinary tasks and hide inside them. I made coffee, even though my hands trembled so much half of it spilled. I unpacked a few boxes. I opened the curtains to let light in, then shut them again because the alley made me uneasy. But every action felt like I was moving around a wound. The worst part wasn't the memory of the knocks. It was the silence. The building was too quiet, like everyone was holding their breath together. Around mid-afternoon, I met one of my neighbors for the first time, a woman in her late 50s, dressed in a faded pink robe, carrying a bag of trash. She stopped when she saw me stepping out of my apartment. "You're the new tenant," she said, voice thin and hoarse, as if she hadn't spoken to someone in days. "Yeah," I replied. "Just moved in yesterday." Her eyes flickered over my face, then to my door, then back to my face. And she frowned. Not like she was confused, more like she was disappointed. "You should have left the wall alone," she murmured. I felt my throat dry up. "Sorry, what?" She didn't answer. She shuffled down the hall, dragging her feet so slowly it sounded like she was pulling a heavy weight behind her. When she reached the elevator, she turned slightly, almost as if someone had called her name in a voice only she could hear. Then the doors shut. The rest of the day, I avoided the bedroom. I stayed in the tiny kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the only living sound in the apartment. I tried watching videos on my phone but ended up jumping at every creak of the floorboards. When the clock reached 11, I felt sick. By the time it was 11:50, I had turned off every light, crawled onto the mattress, and forced myself into a position that faced away from the wall. My body was stiff with dread. I stared at the darkness and counted my breaths. Slow. Quiet. Careful. 11:59. My pulse hammered so loudly I was sure the whole building could hear it. Then midnight. Once again, the apartment shifted, as if the building became aware. The air grew colder, colder than the night before. The wall behind me felt awake, somehow. Seconds passed. Then a sound whispered through the plaster. Not knocking. Not scratching. Breathing. Shallow, raspy breathing, someone straining, struggling, pressing their mouth right up against the wall. I didn't dare move. My back was inches away from whatever was making that sound. I felt the vibration of each inhale and exhale through the mattress. Then a voice, broken, distorted, coming through layers of concrete like a radio tuned between stations, whispered, "You hear me?" I clamped my hands over my mouth, swallowing a cry. The breathing grew louder. Faster. Urgent. Then something pressed the wall from the other side hard enough to bow the plaster inward, like a fist trying to break through. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. I rolled off the mattress in panic and crawled to the opposite side of the room. The air tasted metallic, like blood. The wall pulsed again, another violent shove, and a chunk of plaster fell off, landing near my feet. Behind the missing piece, in the dark hollow inside the wall, something shifted. Skin? Cloth? Bone? I couldn't tell. A pale shape slid just out of view. Then a finger, long, too thin, curled around the exposed edge of the hole. I nearly screamed, but the rule echoed in my mind: no noise after midnight. No attempts to communicate. I slapped both hands over my mouth again. The finger tapped the plaster slowly. Once. Twice. Thrice. Then the voice, much clearer now, said, "Let me out." I scrambled out of the bedroom and slammed the door behind me. I didn't turn on the lights, I didn't breathe, I didn't think. I stood in the dark living room for almost an hour before the noise finally stopped. Before the air warmed. Before the apartment felt empty again. When dawn came. Opened the bedroom door just enough to peek inside. The hole in the wall was bigger now. The mattress was dragged several inches toward it, as if something had tried to pull it inside. And scratched onto the floor, written in long, desperate strokes, were words that hadn't been there before. You answered. The third day didn't feel like a day at all. It felt like an extension of the night before, a long, stretched-out moment of dread that never fully loosened its grip. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the memory of the breathing behind the wall and snapped awake again, gasping. I kept the bedroom door closed. Even from the living room, I could hear faint, rhythmic tapping from inside the wall. A patient sound. A confident sound. As if the thing behind the plaster wasn't trying to break out. It was waiting. Around noon, someone knocked at my front door. A soft, polite knock, the kind a neighbor might make. I nearly cried from relief. Human contact. A witness. Maybe even help. I opened the door, and my stomach tightened. The woman from yesterday stood there, wearing the same faded pink robe, though now it looked damp around the sleeves. Her hair hung limp around her face, and her eyes looked like she hadn't slept in years. She didn't speak. She simply stepped inside without asking, walking like a sleepwalker moving through a dream. I tried ignoring it, she whispered, staring at the living room floor. When I moved here. When I heard it. I swallowed. What is it? She didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her head slowly and looked at me with an expression that almost resembled pity. It gets stronger when you answer, she said. And worse when you listen. My knees felt weak. I leaned against the wall for support. Why doesn't anyone leave? Why are you all still here? That's when she smiled, a thin, sorrowful smile, like someone realizing they lost a game they never agreed to play. We can't. A shudder rippled up my spine. Why? She tilted her head to one side, like she was listening to something. Something I couldn't hear. Then she whispered, because once it knows your voice, it follows. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell her she was insane. But the hole in my bedroom wall said otherwise. The scratches on the floor said otherwise. The whisper that remembered my voice said otherwise. When I turned away from her for a moment, just a moment, to close the front door, the sound of her footsteps vanished. I spun around. She was gone. Not gone down the hallway. Not walking away. Gone. The apartment door had never opened. My entire body went cold. Every hair on my neck stood up. The silence in the apartment thickened, heavy, expectant. I did the only thing my panicked brain could think of. I grabbed my phone, my wallet, and my keys, and I fled. I ran down the stairs, taking them two at a time. The building seemed different, lights flickering, air colder the lower I went. When I burst into the lobby, the landlord was standing behind the front desk, hands folded politely, as if he'd been waiting. He didn't look surprised to see me. You heard it, he said softly. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. You broke the rule, he continued. You answered. And it knows you now. His expression twisted with something like regret, like someone tired of digging graves. You should have read the older version of the contract, he murmured. The part we removed. My breath hitched. What part? That silence isn't to keep it from waking. He swallowed. It's to keep it from choosing. Before I could speak, before I could run, the lights in the lobby flickered once, twice, then died. In the sudden dark, the air filled with a sound I recognized instantly, breathing. Close. Too close. I sprinted out the front door and into the daylight. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to buckle. I didn't stop until I'd reached the bus stop at the end of the street. People stared at me, but I didn't care. For the first time. Since the night I moved in, I felt something like safety. I caught the next bus and didn't look back. I rode it across the city. Then I transferred to another bus. Then another. For hours, I put distance between myself and that building. At sunset, I checked myself into a cheap motel on the farthest edge of town, a place so empty and forgotten it looked like even ghosts would avoid it. I locked the door. I pushed a dresser against it. I turned the TV on for noise and sat on the bed, trying to convince myself that I'd escaped. When the clock hit 11:59, my throat tightened. I told myself it couldn't reach me here. I told myself distance mattered. I told myself I was safe. Then, at precisely midnight, the TV turned off. The air froze. And from the far wall of the motel room, thin, patient, and unmistakably familiar, 3 slow knocks. Once. Twice. Thrice. A whisper seeped through the plaster, sliding under my skin like ice water, "I found you." And that was when I learned the truth. It wasn't an apartment problem. It wasn't a building problem. It wasn't even a contract problem. It was a choice. And the moment I answered that first knock, it chose me. The final knock came louder than all the others, shaking dust from the ceiling. "Let me in." The dresser slid across the floor on its own. The door clicked once, softly, politely. And now, as I write this, I can hear it behind the wall again. Closer. Hungrier. If you're reading this, if you find this story, if anyone ever offers you a place with rent too cheap and rules too strange, don't move in. Don't ask questions. And above all, don't answer the knocking.